Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Embody Lab, our Embodied Intimacy Summit today. So excited to be here with you today. My name is Denise, and I'm your Zoom host for today. And we are grateful that you are here with us today. And we're going to have this session with Awakening Erotic Embodiment with Cindy Darnell today. And our community gathers today from various corners of the globe. We'd like to acknowledge that the land we live and work on is the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples. We respectfully honor their people, cultures, and traditions. So with no further ado, let's welcome our first guest today, Cindy Darnell. I'm excited to get to share space today with Cindy Darnell and support Cindy. Cindy's an internationally acclaimed clinical somatic sexologist, and she's the co-director of our upcoming Embodied Intimacy and Relationship Coaching Certificate Program. The author of Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, The Truth About Mismatched Libido and Rediscovering Desire. She's originally from Australia and now based in New York City, where she runs a global consulting practice. Her work's been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, and so many other places. A psychotherapist by training, Cindy currently supports people navigating relationships and sexual difficulties, plus professional mentorship and case consultations to therapists and coaches around the world seeking to deepen their understanding of the links between psychotherapy, coaching, sexology, intimacy, and somatic practice. Her online pleasure school offers a rich foundation into the world of somatic sexology and sex coaching, including her groundbreaking Atlas of Erotic Anatomy and Arousal. She has a podcast, The Erotic Philosopher. I hope you can check that out, and brings guests from diverse backgrounds together to explore issues affecting modern sex and relationships. Her numerous academic works are published in the Journal of Sexual and Relationship Therapy and the Journal of Sex Education, among others. We'll post how you can find Cindy on our website. And with no further ado, here is Cindy. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, it's morning where I am, and I think afternoon where a lot of you are, perhaps even evening in some places. Thank you for that robust introduction. I was going to tell you all of those things, but I don't need to now because it's already been done for me. I am going to get my slides. I want to invite you all as we get into today to just take a minute to center yourself. Let's begin by taking 3 deep breaths. I like to do in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just to bring my awareness to my center, bring my awareness to where I'm sitting, where I'm connecting with my sits bones and my spine. In through the nose and out through the mouth. If it feels safe for you to close your eyes, I invite you to close your eyes, or perhaps just drop your gaze away from the screen, away from any lights coming in, and just allowing yourself to be here in your body. Noticing your body, and also noticing any thoughts that might be arising for you right now, that they are welcome here today. And they will not be the sole focus. Thoughts are fantastic. I'm a big fan of thinking. But today we're not going to focus on our thoughts. We're going to focus on our presence and our sensations when talking about erotic embodiment. Because the thing about thoughts that is as fantastic as they are is that they can also be deeply unhelpful, especially when we're trying to connect with eroticism. And this is in part because connecting with eroticism is complicated and pleasure is complicated. And as I'm sure many of you all know, that somatic work has gained a lot of traction in recent years, working with trauma and with healing. And somatic work, which is what we're here for today, can also apply to pleasure and connection and to eroticism. So when we talk about eroticism, let's have a little moment to think about, well, what are we actually talking about? Because I think there's a misconception in broader society, especially, that eroticism is carnal, that it's pornographic, that it's kind of this lusty, um, and it can be those things. Of course, it can be those things, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But eroticism is so many things. There's so many parts within us that I think get overlooked by a more mainstream narrative of eroticism being this larger than life, profoundly, a sort of deeply kind of profane thing. And what that can do when it's bigger and larger than life and very sort of heightened pornography, let's say, we can miss some of the more subtle nuances that occur within us. And in the context of, I'll just speak very briefly about pornography because I'm not anti-porn, but the thing about pornography is often that it's made for the eyes. It's made to look spectacular, but it doesn't necessarily do a whole lot for the body, for the somatic element of it, which is what we're focusing on today. And so eroticism is so much more than just the big bang or just having orgasms, these kinds of things, which are great, but they are not often the motivators that people rely on when they engage in sexual pleasure with themselves or with other people, particularly for folks who perhaps struggle with low libido, not being in the mood, which we're not going to talk a whole lot about today, but I do reference that obviously in my book. But it is really about an awareness, bringing an awareness of being able to access the part of ourself that comes alive in response to longing. So I've got a few examples here on the slides. Eroticism can be a rich spiritual center where our secrets go for safekeeping. And for many of us, eroticism is the space between two parts of ourselves, our vulnerability and our excitement. In my book, I talk about eroticism being sex with the mind switched on. I'm not going to give you a explicit definition of what eroticism is because I can't do that for you and you can't do that for your clients. But instead, today I invite you to hold a place for it in our discussion beyond the taboos that society has projected on us that takes us away from being able to be with these sensations in ourselves and just to see what becomes awakened in you when we allow our thoughts just to bypass us and we can instead stay with the sensations and the feelings that eroticism offers us. So pleasure, I think, is also a somewhat vexing issue in society, particularly for folks who are from cultures that really emphasize a bootstraps mentality, this idea of, pleasure is something that you have to earn. It's not a right. And I don't believe that. And pleasure can be so many things also, because many of us struggle to feel pleasure, not because we are broken, but because we never learned how to invite it in, how to feel it, how to cultivate it, how to sustain it. Many of us, interestingly, have a very passive relationship with pleasure. It's almost like we have this idea that it's something that other people give to us rather than something that we create within ourselves, or that something is perhaps something we think of that we can only have in the company of others, that we don't necessarily get pleasure by ourselves. And personally, I don't believe that this is true. Pleasure is a state that we can create within ourselves. That means it's something that we can cultivate, and with practice, we can cultivate it on demand. It's very likely as you go into a sex coaching practice, you're going to meet a lot of clients who struggle with this concept because it has really been spoon-fed to us through music. You think about so many songs that reference romance and sex and connection. It's always about somebody giving something to someone else. Even the way we talk about something like virginity, it's all about giving and taking. There is a very transactional element to the way our culture and our society talks about sex, which leaves us feeling that pleasure is something that we can only wait to be given or we can access to, that we can give to somebody else, rather than a state we create by ourselves. Pleasure is also about empowerment, but it's also about vulnerability. It can be both of these things at the same time and separately. Pleasure is a tool for healing, joy, and also for connection. And our focus in this class today is going to be about connection to ourselves primarily, as a pathway for connection to others. So thinking about connection, a lot of us also tend to think about intimacy. And if I were to ask you, sitting here today, bringing awareness to your body, bringing awareness to your breath, if I were to ask you, how do we create intimacy? What comes to mind? If you have any ideas about how we create intimacy, I invite you to put them into the chat now. And I'm going to also give you some suggestions in case you feel a little bit stumped, because sometimes it is a strange question. Some examples that come to mind for me are listening to others, or certainly being listened to can create a sense of intimacy. Dancing together, creating shared experiences, touch of yourself or of others. Could one of the tech team read out some of the ideas that have come through in the chat?
Absolutely. Hillary says sharing food. Amanda says regulating our nervous system, so we can stay open and manage our triggers during
Yeah.
connection with others. And Dara says hugs. And Petra says intimacy with ourselves first.
Mm-hmm.
Presence, vulnerability, truly seeing oneself and another. Dr. Tati Escudon says being fully present. There's a person who's named Latina. She says laughing. And
Yes. Oh, laughing is a great one. Because that completely resets our nervous system. That's all of these are fantastic. And so this is the thing. Thank you, Denise. All of these ideas are different ways of creating intimacy, yet often, especially for people in English-speaking cultures, intimacy is often a word that is used synonymously with sex. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, intimacy and sex are not the same thing. They can go together. They can go together like red wine and chocolate, but they can also go together like oil and vinegar. In the right combination, they make a fabulous salad dressing, but they can also sometimes repel each other. So it's, I think, important as we go in the direction of doing this work, working as sex coaches and working with our clients around sex and intimacy, is that we have a sense, at least within ourselves, that we may want to impart with our clients going forward, about the space between sex and intimacy and how we can bring them together or separate them when they're needed. And that intimacy really is the essence of connection, whereas sex can occur with or without connection and with or without intimacy. Again, depending on our client's requirements, will determine the degree to which these two things need to come together. So we've talked just previously in the last couple of minutes about how we create intimacy. I want to invite you now to bring your attention to sustaining intimacy, because this is, for a lot of people, significantly more complicated. So whether we are sharing intimacy with friends in a more platonic fashion or with lovers in a more erotic, sensual fashion, sustained intimacy requires the ability to tolerate discomfort. Isn't that amazing? Something that we don't hear about when it comes to sex and pleasure and eroticism is our ability to learn to at times tolerate discomfort. Now, sometimes that discomfort, and I'm not talking about pain, I'm talking about discomfort. I'm talking about learning to tolerate the vulnerability of really being seen by somebody, not just with eyes, but with their presence, and being able to bring that to us. For a lot of people, especially when we start to merge this with sex, it can feel uncomfortable, not painful. I'm talking about discomfort. Now, this is where embodiment, which is what we're here for, can really, really help. Okay, let's have a little look at some of the barriers to intimacy. Now, in my practice, I don't know how it is for you all, but in my practice, many people describe a difficulty concentrating during sex, during pleasure, and even during conversational intimacy. People will often divert, or they'll sort of wiggle around, or their eyes are darting all over the place. And this is often a sign of, again, not of pain, but of discomfort, which is not a bad thing. But we're just simply bringing our awareness to what happens within us or between us when intimacy is present. And then we start adding in extra layers of removing clothes, creating arousal in the body. And these are things that in many societies are considered taboo. So it can be very difficult for us to be able to hold intimacy while simultaneously dealing with the layers of thousands of years of social conditioning around something that we are told is bad or dangerous or wrong. People often say that when they think about sex, they think about pleasure and connection, yet during sex, many are often thinking about everything except pleasure and connection, right? Can any of you relate to that? We're thinking about so many things. They're thinking about their emails. They're thinking about their to-do list. They're thinking about how their body looks, but not so much how it feels. They're thinking about what the other person is thinking about. Or you might be thinking about your body and thinking, am I going to stay hard? Or am I too fat? Or am I taking too long? Etc., etc. These are the kinds of thoughts that can be very, very disruptive. And it's easy to say, well, just don't think about it. But of course, we can't stop those thoughts coming. But we have some control around the degree to which we center those thoughts. And for a lot of folks who struggle with pleasure and intimacy, which really is the vast population, it's about teaching them skills, teaching them erotic embodiment skills to learn how to maneuver through those unhelpful thoughts, to bring them to a place of rich understanding while also being able to tolerate the discomfort that some of these thoughts create. On the screen here, we might notice that in addition to ruminating thoughts, we might experience at a somatic level an urge to flee, racing thoughts, as we've been discussing, distraction, disembodiment, numbness, shame, or often particularly, but this can be true sometimes too for people in relationships, this feeling of I'm not in the mood. And all of these things can, not always, but they can be indicators of difficulties with intimacy, difficulties with connection, especially with erotic connection. And so this is where embodiment becomes a really useful antidote. And I put here in the second section that connection to self is crucial in connection to others. If we are not aware of what we are bringing to an erotic encounter with a partner or a friend, it is very, very difficult to connect with another person if we are finding it at the same time difficult to connect with ourselves. This is not to lay blame, but it is to highlight the complexity of how this can manifest for a lot of people, that it's not always going to be like a big T trauma. It can be these subtle experiences which are very, very consistent especially, and I'll put this in a Western context, that's what I'm most familiar with. Folks who've grown up in the West are going to be very familiar with things like purity culture and narratives, whether they come from religion or from patriarchy, that tell us there is a certain way for sex to happen. Only these people are deserving of sex. You can do sex like this, but not like that. All these kinds of narratives really start to take a hold, even for people who are progressive and educated and aware. This stuff is really rich and really deep. And this is what I mean about thousands of years of conditioning. And so as we take our clothes off, a lot of these social conditioning barriers come to the fore, and most of our work in sex coaching is in helping folks navigate this, to help them understand what they're experiencing is not their fault, but it is their responsibility. All right, so I have been talking a lot for the last 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to invite you, with your consent, of course, because everything is about consent. For the next 2 minutes, I'm going to invite you to stand up if standing up is something that your body is able to do. If not, you can remain seated. Turn your camera off if you feel uncomfortable, or flip your camera up to the ceiling or to the floor. And for 2 minutes, I'm going to time you. Shake your body. Just shake, 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 shake. Allow everything to shake. We've started now, and the time starts now. So allow yourself to shake. If you're feeling in any way self-conscious, that's okay. Just turn your camera off. 2 minutes to just let it out, let it go. Shake everything. Shake your hair, shake your ears, shake your tongue, shake your eyelids, shake your lips. Shake your nostrils, shake your elbows, do the chicken, shake your ankles, shake your toes, and really go, like really let yourself use the energy that's there, not just a gentle shake, but a real shake, 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 as much as your body can tolerate, to the context that it still feels safe. But remember that discomfort is part of shifting how our bodies work. So we are going for the edge of discomfort, not right over the edge, but just right up to the, oof, yeah, I can start to feel it moving now. We still have 1 more minute. Continue to shake. Is there a part of your body you've been ignoring? You can bring your awareness to your genitals, to your butt. Shake your butt cheeks if you can. Knees, thighs, fingers, wrists, thumbs. Let everything shake. Everything shake. If you can't shake anymore, you can try patting your body, spanking your body, pinching. We're encouraging blood flow. We have 30 seconds more. Stroking your body with big, hard, firm strokes. What we are doing here is creating arousal. We are inviting the body to wake up. We are bringing blood to the surface. This is what arousal is, whether we have penises or vulvas. All arousal happens with the presence of blood. That's all arousal means. But unfortunately, arousal has a bad rap. Okay, bring yourself now to stillness. And then return to your original position. Come back to your camera, come back to your spot. We'll wait a minute for everybody to come back in. And I just want to invite you again to notice how your body feels in contrast with how it felt a couple of minutes ago. That practice of moving, of bringing blood into the body in a sustained and vigorous fashion. And this is why I really wanted to encourage you to really move your body. For those of us who have the ability to move our bodies with vigor, it is, I think, a really useful practice to be able to practice doing that and associating movement with arousal. A lot of us, particularly people who have been socialized as female cis women, our upbringings have often centered, certainly when it comes to the erotic, to be small and to be still. that sex is something that is done to us rather than something that we actively participate in. And over time, the long-term effect of this, shortening, truncating of the erotic body, the energetic body, means that it makes it much harder for us to feel things. In my practice, particularly working with people assigned female at birth and cis women, it is not uncommon for them to come to me and say, I feel nothing. I feel numb. I have trouble with orgasm. This can be a combination of some of the things I've already talked about, and also this sense of the body being kind of stuck. So allowing the body to move in a free-form fashion, fully clothed, not in any explicitly erotic way necessarily, allows us to make a connection with the blood, pinching, patting, slapping, these kinds of things, bringing blood into the body, offer us an opportunity to wake the body up on our own terms. So one of the crucial elements of working with folks around sex and pleasure is, and getting present, becoming erotically embodied, is to move our bodies. Feedback from folks in the chat box, and Denise, if you wouldn't mind reading some of these things out, any things that you're noticing that you want to share. If it's too personal, I understand you don't have to include anything in the chat box, but for those who would like to share, if anything's coming up, how they notice the difference between how they felt before in contrast with how they felt now. No? Okay. Um, and for those who are interested in learning more about arousal in particular, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Atlas of Erotic Anatomy and Arousal. That's my online video series where I actually take you through 2.5 hours of education about arousal, very specific to the pelvis and how arousal works from a pleasure perspective, not from a reproduction perspective. None of what I teach in my private work nor here in the Embody Lab is going to be focused on reproduction. I think that there's a lot of information about reproduction, but there are hundreds, literally hundreds of reasons that people engage in sex, and reproduction is quite way down on the list for a lot of folks. So there's a lot of reproduction information out there. It's not something that I focus on. All right, so moving on. The next aspect I want to share with you of getting erotically present is in our ability to breathe. So piggybacking on the back of movement, breath, I think, is really crucial to being able to bring sensation and aliveness to our body. And one of the examples that I often give my clients is that, dead people don't breathe. In order to be alive, we have to breathe. It's the one thing that's just not negotiable. Yet, when we're feeling tense, which again could happen during sex, this tension, we can shut down this truncating, this smallness of the body. When we're feeling tense, particularly in response to pleasure, this is the discomfort I was referring to. Not pain, discomfort. This is the discomfort. In response to pleasure, connection, and intimacy, we might notice that our breathing is shallow. So as we're sitting here right now, we've been talking about sex for the last half hour. Notice your breathing. I just realized my breathing even was shallow. I'm concentrating and looking at my thing here and looking at all of you. So I've got like 45 things happening at the same time. And I've just noticed, oh my goodness, my breathing is shallow. How is your breathing? Check in. And just allow yourself to feel. Now, the next exercise I want to teach you, I'm going to ask one of my assistants here who we prepared earlier about the opportunity to do a demonstration. And I've got, who's going to help me with this? Great. Hello. So if you would, unmute yourself. This is an exercise that I'm going to demonstrate here, and then I'm going to invite you to do it with yourself. But we're just going to do a short demonstration to help you understand what it is that I am inviting you to practice. So as we get into this morning, how are you feeling?
Yeah, good. A little nervous.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you doing this demo with me because I know I sort of put you on the spot at the start of the session, so I really appreciate you doing this. So I'm going to invite you to begin by taking 3 deep breaths and notice if your body wants to close your eyes or if you just want to drop your gaze down or if you're okay staying with me. What do you feel? What is your body telling you it would like to do right now?
Close my eyes.
Close your eyes. Okay, thank you. So allow your body to do that. And now bring your attention to a part of your body that you feel neutral about. So it might be your little finger, it might be your thumb, it might be your elbow, it might be your shoulder, your knee, anything at all, a body part. And I would invite you to say that body part out loud.
My right shoulder.
Okay. So as you breathe in through your nose, allow yourself to send your breath to your right shoulder. And sending breath to your right shoulder might happen through sound or vision or sensation. So for example, as you send your breath to your shoulder, you might hear a whooshing sound or a whizzing sound. For some of us who are auditory, the sound will be the strongest thing as we send the breath in through the nose and, in this case, to the right shoulder. For those of us who are visual, we might see the breath moving to the shoulder. And for those of us who are more kinesthetic, sensory-based, we will actually feel the shoulder starting to move and throb in response to the breath being sent there. So tell me, as you're breathing and sending your awareness and attention to the shoulder, which of those 3, sound, visual, or sensation, feel like they fit most for you?
Sensation.
Okay. And are you able to describe the sensation in your right shoulder as you send your breath there?
It's like a swirly, like alive, just aliveness, awareness there.
Oh. Is it a feeling that brings emotion with it as well?
It makes you just want to yawn.
Oh, okay. So allow your body to take in more breath. And if you would like to increase the sensation, notice what happens if you take in more breath in through the nose and then out through the mouth, continuing to make this connection with the right shoulder, which is your chosen body part. Sending awareness, sending breath, sending aliveness to this body part, thanking it for doing its job, thanking it for being with you all these years, and thanking it for any future function that it brings you. So some big yawns happening here. How is your shoulder feeling?
And the exhale feels a little uncomfortable for some reason, but the inhale is
Okay. So there's some information here about what your shoulder is wanting to tell you. But now that you have this awareness, breathing awareness, breathing into for a neutral body part, which is what we're doing today, gives us the opportunity to read information. And as we complete this demo, I want to say thank you to my demo model for being here today and for offering your shoulder in service to our learning. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite all of you now to do a practice very similar to this. Again, we'll do this for a couple of minutes. I will talk you through it. Choose a body part that you feel neutral about. The reason I'm asking you to choose a body part that you feel neutral about is I don't want you to go into a loaded situation where you might be storing historical emotions that we don't have the time to work through fully today. So use your own intelligence, use your own wisdom to choose a neutral body part that you are willing to work with for the next couple of minutes. And when you have that body part, close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or drop your gaze. And as you breathe in, send your awareness to that body part. Send the breath to that body part and allow it to communicate with you about what it's feeling. As you breathe in, you might notice that you are a visual person, and you might start seeing visions of the breath moving toward that body part. Allow yourself to notice what those visions are, and notice how you see breath moving around your body. If you are an auditory person, somebody who responds to sound, you might hear the breath moving through your body. Take notice of how it sounds to have intentional breath moving to a very specific body part, and the effect that it creates on that body part. And if you are a kinesthetic or sensation-oriented person, notice what happens to your body, specifically to that body part, the more that you breathe into it. So remember, we are not necessarily doing healing work here. We are doing activation work. You're inviting that part of your body to come online, to be receptive to sensation, to be receptive to feeling. And if we are awakening pleasure, we are bringing our awareness to our body through breath. So our previous exercise was movement. This one is breath, breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. If you're finding it hard to connect with the chosen body part, allow yourself to take in more breath, either by breathing in and out through your mouth, or increasing the speed of your breath. Experiment with the breath to see what happens to the body part you've selected if you shift your breathing slightly by taking in more oxygen. If you're starting to feel like you have too much happening in that body part, shift your breathing to a down-regulating breath, which is just in and out through the nose. You get to play with this like a gas pedal and a brake pedal, simply by shifting your breath. So we'll hang here for another 30 seconds, and then I will bring you back into the larger group, and finding a way to say thank you to that body part for showing up today. Say thank you to that body part for bringing its awareness and its sensation to you. And if you feel inclined, put into the chat a little bit about your experience of bringing awareness to an isolated body part by using breath. And Denise, if you wouldn't mind reading out a few comments, that would be great.
Let's see. Amanda Lloyd says tingly. Michelle says activation created release. Lucy says I felt agitated and uncomfortable on the inhalation.
Okay.
And
so this is part of the discomfort.
someone said could not breathe through the mouth, only nose. Tease some tingling in my leg and foot. Jana says right calf has never felt so relaxed.
Fabulous. Wonderful.
Roxanne says I choose my left shoulder. It went from being knotted to relaxed and smoothed out.
Interesting.
Stephanie says how tense my shoulders are. The breath helps to let it go.
Yeah.
Julie created presence, noticed it's hard to stay with it. And Nate says, interesting buzzing sensation. And William says, I focus on my feet and I use sound, and the sensations both work together in a beautiful way to ground me in the moment in a big way.
Amazing. Thank you very much for your feedback, everybody. And there's so many different types of experiences there. And this is also going to be true with your clients. There's not necessarily going to be one experience that they have, or even a correct experience. That's not what we're going for. And we're not necessarily trying to force folks to have an experience, but rather to bring awareness and connection. So it's coming back to this idea of intimacy, coming back to this idea of connection, and bringing awareness to very specific parts of the body. Now, for the purpose of this class, I invited you specifically to choose a body part that you had a neutral relationship with. The reason why is because I didn't want anybody to get super activated and super triggered. Now, if you're doing a practice similar to this with a body part that perhaps has a more complicated history, for a lot of people, the genitals can, not always, but can have more complicated histories. If we were doing this practice, you focusing specifically on certain parts of the genitals, or perhaps the anus, or even the chest, the nipples, these kinds of areas, sometimes people can have a combination of feelings. They can have feelings that are pleasant. They might have some feelings that are unpleasant. Notice that I don't use words like positive and negative, because when it comes to sex and the body, I don't want to put those kind of value judgment language words on our experience. I recognize that some experiences are unpleasant, and I recognize that some are pleasant. And I think for me anyway, this is a really crucial framework to allow myself, to allow you, to allow our clients to be able to have a full breadth of emotional access without labeling something as good or bad or black or white. We acknowledge that some feelings feel great and some are less than great, but that is not necessarily, the end of the line. In order to be able to feel what we're feeling, we have to be allowed to experience both pleasant and less than pleasant feelings. So all feelings are welcome and no feeling is final. This is really crucial when we're doing erotic embodiment work. People are going to expect that they're going to be having, orgasmic sensations all the time. Sometimes it's like that. And some days you will have that experience. And then there are other days where it's like, oh gosh, I feel terrible. And that's all part of the soup. This is part of being able to wake our body up to eroticism, is that we give our bodies permission to feel what they're feeling, rather than forcing or corralling them to be a certain way, or to look a certain way, or to do a certain thing. So, and this can become much more acute, let's say, when we're looking at body parts that have historically been very, very stigmatized, not through any fault of our own, but because we have grown up in cultures that have told us this body part is good, this body part is not good. A lot of our work is unpacking some of those feelings. Okay, next part of our class today, as we head towards the end, is we're going to have a look at touch. Touch can be really complicated for a lot of people, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And for our class purposes today, I want to invite you to just pick up an object, anything that's around. So in my case, I'm just going to pick up my water bottle. Just pick it up and bring your awareness to your hand and how you're touching that object. Notice that when we go to touch objects, we tend to go and use our fingers. This is sort of, this kind of monkey grip practice that we all do, that allows us to, to get through our lives, which is fine. But when it comes to touching our bodies, or it comes to touching other people's bodies, approaching with that same sense of let's say fingers first, it can be good. I'm not saying that fingers are a bad thing. They're a great thing. But what can happen is that it can sometimes feel like we are being grabbed at in the same way that we might be grabbing an object, this sense of sort of grabbing with the fingers. So as an alternative, and I want to invite you to do this as an experiment, bring your awareness to a part of your body that you're willing to touch on camera. So again, nothing super explicit. You might just, I keep doing my chest, so you can do your chest, you can do your shoulder, you can do the top of your head. Again, a fairly neutral, benign sort of place. Bring awareness to a part of your body that would allow itself to be touched right now. And then with whichever hand, it doesn't matter which hand you're using, bring awareness to the center of your palm. And you can even with your other hand, make a circular motion in the center of your palm. And you, until you feel a sort of almost a tingly sensation in the center of the palm. And when you've got that connection with the palm, you can even put it up to your cheek and feel some heat coming off of it. Rubbing your palms together like this, if you can't feel enough heat, can help generate a little bit of heat, and just feel it by putting your hand to your cheek, not quite on your cheek, but nearby. And then when you've got this connection to the palm, place the palm on the part of your body you've chosen. So in my case, it's the chest. So I'm going to place my hand on my chest, palm first, so the fingers are up, and then the fingers come down second. So it's palm first, fingers down. To give you a sense of what it looks like, it's like this, and then the fingers come after. Now, don't sort of strain your hand and be too stiff with it. It's more of an awareness of connecting with the palm, and then the fingers come after, as opposed to touching yourself like an object, you know, with your fingers first, pressing with the palm, and then allowing the fingers to follow. And then notice how your body responds to that. Breathe into the sensation of the part of the body that is being touched. So you have the sensation of your hand, what the hand can feel, but there is also the sensation of what the part of the body being touched can feel. And notice how it responds to that sense of pressure that comes from a palm first connection rather than a fingers first connection. Again, I am not saying that this is a superior way of touching necessarily. Context by context, things are going to be different. But there is something for some people about the option of a palm first connection as opposed to a fingers first connection that can feel stabilizing. It can feel secure. It can feel like you're really being held, even if you're doing it to yourself. You can do this practice even with pets as you're stroking them, and just noticing how they respond to a degree of pressure that takes them right to a beautiful place of connection. It's not too much, but it's not so light that sometimes a light touch can feel a bit like you don't really want to be there, like you don't really want to be touching them. You're just sort of touching a little bit like this. Being able to find that really sweet spot between where is the right amount of pressure, what is too much, and what is not enough. And even allowing your body to lean into that degree of touch. Notice what your body is looking for. Notice what your body is asking for. So we're really bringing awareness to how our body feels and responds to touch. Incorporate this with your breath, sending breath to the part of the body that's being touched. And also we're doing a little bit of movement. If you want to start moving your hand to create a sensation in that part of the body, again, focus your attention on when you're pressing with the palm, does the body like that? If you want to press down with the fingers as well, notice what is different. All we're doing is noticing. We are experimenting. So we're just bringing awareness to how the body responds. And if your body is longing for more right now, or perhaps less, You have permission to give that to yourself if you want to. Experimenting with pressure, sensation, speed, friction, all of these are elements of touch, which when combined with breath and movement, really form the foundations of eroticism and erotic pleasure in the way that we conceive of sex and intimacy. Now, again, for the purposes of the demonstration, I invited you to choose a body part that was fairly benign, fairly neutral. You can imagine how this might apply to body parts that have more sensation organically, genitals in particular, and how we might experiment with touching our chests, touching our nipples, touching our genitals, or the chests and genitals of other people. It's really, really an enlightening way of being able to, of learning how to touch rather than just grabbing at things like they are objects, bringing a sense of intentionality and awareness to touching. So, to recap here, as I invite you to come back to the screen, to come back to our discussion today, and then we're going to open up for questions shortly. A review of what you've learned today. We've learned about 3 fundamentals of awakening erotic embodiment. We've learned about the power of movement and what movement can do to help settle the body and help us corral some of those unhelpful racing thoughts. To simply shake, as Taylor Swift says, just to shake it off can sometimes help us create a container, create a context, create a mood for us to start moving forward toward an embodied erotic experience. We have experimented today with breath, combining breath with movement in order to send awareness to chosen body parts. We also might like to send breath to our entire body, and then sometimes for folks who need specific help with specific issues, sending breath to a particular body part can be a useful technique, which is what you've learned today. And finally, touch can be used, I wouldn't necessarily say alone, but it can be used as a third pillar, a third tier of this trifecta of movement, breath, and touch to help our clients move toward a container, to a place of safe erotic embodiment for themselves, and then perhaps between the work that you are both doing together. And I'm going to open it up for questions now that you can put into the chat box, and Denise and the team are going to select some of those questions for me because my eyes can't rest on the screen to read your questions, so I asked them in advance to help me with this part. You can get extra help from me if you want to do case consultations or extra support. I offer mentorship to coaches and clinicians worldwide. There is a page on my website dedicated to that. I have my book, Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, and online courses at my website, cindydarnell.com. And of course, I am the co-director of the Intimacy Coaching Program here at the Embody Lab, which I really hope that all of you are going to be joining us for. And I'm on all the socials, which you can see there. I tend to be most active on Instagram, but even that can even be a bit hit and miss. I'm not a huge social media person, but I pop up every now and again, so I'd love to hear from you there. And Denise, I am going to ask you to
Okay.
give me the question.
Yeah,
Statements, comments, whatever you got.
there's a couple of questions here. Chayo is asked, it says, hi Cindy, I know you from Pink Therapy Community.
Oh, wonderful, huh?
And binary. So there are many of their clients, lots of clients feel very difficult feeling in the body. So they can get very dysphoric when I center on bodies. What are your suggestions for working with that?
So it depends. I think I understand with I have a lot of clients who are gender non-conforming, and there are going to be body parts that are going to be more triggering than others. Often, not always, but often, the body parts that we tend to associate as, with sex characteristics can be the ones that are most triggering for gender non-conforming people. So what I suggest in that context is, instead of focusing on genitals and nipples and things like that, focus on body parts that are neutral. Chest, for example, like here, the sternum, not chest tissue, the sternum, belly, thighs, buttocks, upper arms, inside of the wrist, back of the neck, behind the ears, the scalp. These are all places, parts of the body, feet, that are non-gender specific. Everybody has them. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people have them. And they are zones of great pleasure. I think the idea of kind of erogenous zones is this sort of idea from, probably literally the last century, which, it is what it is. But it tends to kind of narrow our focus about, where pleasure lives in the body. The truth is, when we combine pleasure conceptually, pleasure and connection with movement, breath, and touch, the entire body is capable of incredible sensation to the lips. This is why kissing can feel, for some people, fantastic, and not necessarily for others. Not everybody is going to like every single thing. So it's really about, when you're working with clients who are gender non-conforming in whatever fashion, it's about inviting them to tell you which body parts they have either a good relationship or neutral relationship with, and invite them to, we want to work on building pleasure and sensation in the parts that are easier, rather than corralling and forcing them into moving toward body parts that are, a source of difficulty and trauma. Not every body part needs to be included. This is also true for cis people. Not all cis people want to have particular body parts centered and emphasized, even if they are traditionally sexy body parts. We don't have to like every single bit of our bodies. So we bring our awareness to the parts that we can tolerate, that we feel neutral about, or that we do like, rather than forcing and shoving ourselves into having an erotic relationship with parts of our bodies that are really just not good for us to overemphasize. I hope that answers your question. Thanks, Pink Therapy. I love you.
Oh, and Alex, was right after the experience you led, Alex was asking, can you have two visual and kinesthetic things going
Oh,
on at the
of course. Thank you. That's a great question. Yes, you can have all three, and then there may be ones that I didn't even suggest. In my experience of doing this work I've been doing this for nearly 30 years now. Folks generally fall into those three categories, but not necessarily singularly just one. I wanted to highlight those for you as learning opportunities, so you can be aware of, oh, it might be this or it might be that. Because sometimes when when practitioners say, imagine the breath going to, X body part, sometimes that imagination can be, we might think, oh, it has to be visual. I have to be able to see it in my mind's eye. And for people who are not visually oriented, that feels, impossible, and it can be an alienating experience. So our practice is to help bring awareness to, how does our body communicate with us? Is it through sound? Is it through vision? Is it through touch? Is it through a combination of those things? Is it through something else? There might be some other thing that you have, a way that you're like a felt sense that's none of those things. Whatever your body brings to you, or your client's body brings to them as a means of communication, go with it. Don't question it. So that's a great question. Thank you.
And Becca's asking, why does yawning increase when we do these exercises?
Why does what increase?
Yawning.
Oh, look, I think there's a lot of different theories about what yawning represents. Some practitioners and some science suggests that yawning is about relaxation. Others say that it's the body longing for more oxygen. Others say that it's in response to fear sometimes. I can't say. One of the things that I don't do is categorically say the body does this because of that, especially when it comes to the erotic, when it comes to sex, when it comes to awakening the body in the face of something that has been so historically misunderstood and stigmatized. And I'm talking specifically about sex, all kinds of sex practices. So if the body is yawning and it's becoming a distraction, that may mean that it's too much, the work is too intense for you, and you might want to step it back a little bit. It may mean that you just need to go outside. It might mean that you're tired, that you just didn't sleep much. It could be all kinds of things. So rather than reading into, this categorically means that, I tend to not take that approach with any of the work that I do. And I'm always keeping a spirit of curiosity. What might it mean? And I will always ask the client first, I'm noticing that you're yawning a lot. What's happening? What do you make of that? Rather than telling them you're feeling this because of that.
Okay, Ashlyn is asking what recommendations that you'd suggest for those with a history of sexual trauma or religious trauma connected to shame around purity culture. Do you have a specific recommendation?
I would recommend a very slow, gentle approach. Undoing the stigma of sex from purity culture is going to take time, because especially if you've been immersed in purity culture your whole life, say from childhood through to, I don't know how old you are, but let's just say you're 30. If you've been immersed in purity culture for 30 years, you're going to the time it's going to take to undo that is going to be, it's going to take a little bit. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to take 30 years to undo it, but you want to approach this with a spirit of kindness and not put too much pressure on yourself or on your clients to undo it overnight. It's going to take time, in the same way that we absorb purity culture, over time. Unpacking it and undoing it and releasing it also takes time. And there may be aspects of purity culture that you will carry for the rest of your life. And that doesn't mean that you've failed at releasing yourself from it, but it really is about finding a place of compassion in understanding that some of the narratives you carry are not your fault. And it is going to be a consistent, not constant, but a consistent practice of mindfulness and awareness and immersing yourself in alternatives, cultural and social alternatives. For example, the practices we learned today, to help retrain your nervous system, to help retrain your body to respond differently to some of the social cues that tell you sex is bad, pleasure's bad, connection is bad, lust is dangerous, all these kinds of messages.
Right. So much. Amanda, this is a rather large question, I think, but Amanda's asking small ways to work through sexual vulnerability blocks.
It really depends on the block. I have a theory from my years of experience. A sexual block is a messenger from your body. We don't necessarily want to remove them. We want to inquire with them. We want to know, why are they there? What message are they trying to send us? What purpose are they in our lives for? Removing blocks without understanding the purpose of the block, I think, can be unhelpful, because a lot of us develop what we refer to as blocks as protection mechanisms because of some sense of feeling like we need them. Those things may not be there. They were there for a reason. They were created for a reason in a lot of cases. So removing them unnecessarily or without a container or a context, I think, is not always going to be helpful. So before we start removing blocks, we want to inquire about what their purpose is and bring some compassion to them, and tell said blocks that they are welcome, but they are no longer necessary. And that is one of the really big distinctions, I think, about removing blocks is, and I see this particularly in Tantra circles that tend to have a very strong emphasis coming in from purity culture, that there can be aspects of it that are very black and white. In my practice, I don't take a black and white perspective of sex, because one of the things I teach is that if we only see the world in black and white, we will always miss the rainbow. We must be looking for the technicolor in between these places. And so blocks are messengers. They're here to teach us something.
Awesome. Thank you. And Savannah is asking, what can one do if you're feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated and can't handle being touched? Are there techniques to get back into the mood or back into a place where you can participate?
So two things come to mind. First is take a break from whatever you're doing. Just stop. Stop what you're doing, and get up, have a glass of water, put some music on, and do a little shaky dance thing. That can be a really helpful way to reset you. If you are finding it overwhelming in the moment, ask, instead of saying, I don't want this, and ending, which is fine, first of all. But if it's, say, if it's on a scale of 0 to 10, and you know, if something needs to end, you're probably at the 8, 9, 10 level. If you're kind of like at a 4 or a 5, you might stop and ask your body, what would make this better for me? What would I like instead of this? Rather than, I need to completely stop at the 9-10 scale. The 4-5 scale gives you a little bit of wiggle room to say, what might make this better? Maybe you just need to move your leg. Maybe you're cold. Maybe you're too hot. Maybe you're dehydrated. Dehydration can ruin the best of intentions. So make sure you've got some water. And another practice I think that can be super helpful is to be really attentive to your breathing. If breath is, if you're not breathing enough or you're breathing too much, breathing through your nose generally is down regulating. Breathing through your mouth in and out is up regulating. So what we mean by that is, if you want to feel more, you breathe more. If you want to feel a bit less, you breathe less, which is why most of us just, you know, in a daily state, our breathing is shallow, because it's too much. If I'm walking around New York City breathing in all of the blah, blah, I'm feeling too much. It's too overwhelming. So, you know, in my daily life, I tend to have a fairly shallow breath. But when I'm engaging in stuff that brings me pleasure, whether it's sex or hanging out with my dogs or whatever it is, I will be much more intentional about taking in more breath, and I'll take in more breath through my mouth, and more shallow breath through the nose helps shut things down. So we can use the breathing as a dial for increasing pleasure states and decreasing pleasure states, or increasing sensation states, I should say.
Awesome. And Ruth is asking how often that you should practice the move, breathe, touch techniques in order for them to become second nature and to be a go-to tool.
I don't know that there's a number, but I've been practicing them for about 30 years. And I guess it feels like second nature for me, but I think, I mean, look, it's like with anything, you know, learning a language. And this is effectively what you're doing. You're learning a language here. The more you do it, the more, quote unquote, natural it becomes. One of the things I tend to say, and I talk about this in my book, is I don't believe that sex is natural, it's learned. The instinct, I think, might be natural for people, but the practice is absolutely learned. So the reason a lot of people struggle with creating quality sex is because they haven't learned how to do it. And it's because of this idea that sex is natural. When you're with the right person, it just magically happens and it's just fabulous. And that's BS. Like, it's absolute BS. We have to learn it. So how long does it take? As long as it takes to learn a language. You know, you perfect it over time, and then you might learn more things, and then your body's going to change, or your clients' bodies are going to change. What they liked last week, they might not like this week. So it's a constant quest of paying attention. It's, I call this in a lot of ways, this is sort of like, erotic mindfulness, or meditation with your pants off, whatever you want to call it. It's really about bringing awareness. So it's a lifetime pursuit.
Awesome. Thank you. Sanaz, it's a similar question that was asked earlier, but just a slightly different framing. Sanaz is asking what your suggestion is when clients don't want to try embodied inquiry. They get annoyed or impatient. They insist that they don't feel anything. Any ideas about approaches?
If a client says they don't want to do something, then I don't do it. Like, period. That's the end. There is no need or reason to corral people into doing stuff they don't want to do. For some people, that is the first time they ever realized that sex was about choice. And so if we power through, in the name of, with good intentions, I believe we all have good intentions in our work, but we cannot force clients to do erotic embodiment work if everything in their body is saying no or whatever. It might be that you don't do it that day, and you say, okay, I hear you, and your request is honored. And for some clients, that might be the first time that their no has been heard. And that is erotic empowerment right there. And then you might bring it up again in a month and say, listen, I was curious. We've done this, and this work, and I've seen how you've really grown. How might you feel about doing a touch-based practice? And again, getting them to focus on very neutral areas, ears and places that don't have a lot of stigma attached to them is usually the best place to start. But I would never, 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 never force people into erotic embodiment if they don't want to go there. That's very not good.
And Ashlyn is asking, if you work with neurodiversity specifically in this area, and what you might suggest for resources for others to support exploring sensory differences and possible accommodations to meet sensory needs and sensitivities because of divergence.
I don't know that there is one resource for all types of neurodiversity when it comes to sex. I don't even know that such a thing will ever exist, because there's so many different types of neurodiversities, right? Your client is the one who knows best. They know what works. They know what they can tolerate. They know what they can't tolerate. So again, if we are trying to force people to have an experience that their body is telling us they can't, they don't, they won't, they whatever, then, we have to go with that. That said, if somebody is coming to you specifically for sex coaching, there is a part of them that wants change with sex. So that's the part that we dig out. If the practice you're offering them doesn't work today, leave it and go and find another practice and then come back to it at another time. Also, that client's history will tell you what has worked in the past. Do a little bit of investigation and find out, when touch has been pleasant for you, what has worked. And again, start with the really benign stuff. I like people touching my ears or feet, or, I like the feeling of fur, but not metal. That kind of stuff is really, really useful. Our clients' bodies have an enormous amount of wisdom. Our job is to help extract what that wisdom is. And so we have to become, private investigators, investigative journalists. We have to really become curious rather than believing that we have all the answers for all people at all times. We don't. Our job is to facilitate, erotic awakening is about awakening stuff in them, not making them like us. So, and this is true when you're working with neurotypical people as much as when you're working with neurodiverse people. We are still approaching it through this place of curiosity, taking tiny, tiny increments at a time. and bringing awareness, depending on a client's neurodiversity, depending on how it works for them. What's going to work for one is not necessarily going to work for another. If you're working with a client for whom touch is just intolerable in all forms, it may be helpful then to have a conversation with them about, why they are here with you right now. Why have they chosen you? What are they looking for? If touch is intolerable, is that something that they want to work on with you, or are they okay with not having touch being part of their erotic world? Because if they're okay with it, then there's nothing to change. It is okay for them to be how they are.
Awesome. Thank you. And there's Deli has a question. How do you deal with or approach heaviness in the heart of the body? And what does this mean or symbolize to you? So when the body feels heavy.
Again, it would be, like we were talking about earlier about blocks. It depends on the client's interpretation of the heaviness. Is the heaviness, does it feel good? Or does it feel not so good? Because perhaps for somebody who's recovering from an eating disorder, heaviness in the body might feel great. Like, oh my goodness, I'm really here and grounded, and oof, oh, I'm taking up space for the first time in my life. Or for somebody who is grieving, heaviness might have a whole different narrative attached to it. So our job is to investigate the meaning of the heaviness. What does it mean to the client? What can they glean from it? And if we were to ask the heaviness why it's there and what its purpose was, what might the heaviness tell us?
I love that approach. And we've got Tara asks, what's the connection between erectile dysfunction and sexual abuse, and how to work with that in a trauma-informed approach?
There's no direct connection between erectile dysfunction. I don't use the word erectile dysfunction because that's a medical term. I talk about erections that are reliable and unreliable. So first of all, unreliable erections are completely normal. 100% of penis havers will experience unreliable erections at least once in their life, because this is how penises work. It's just how they work. They're not always, on demand. Penis havers will say that they get erections riding a bus, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily wanting to have sex with a bus. It's just how the body does its thing. And then there are other times where they really want to have the erection, and for whatever reason, it's just not happening at the time. There are studies that have shown relationships between people who have been recipients of sexual trauma and difficulties remaining present during sex in their adult life. That is definitely true. However, when it comes specifically to unreliable erections and sexual trauma, it's less about there being this causes that, and more about, again, I really, if you only take away one thing from today, I really want you to take away that you must, when you're doing sexuality work with clients, you must have a spirit of curiosity. You must, because if you are not curious and you start making deductions about people's bodies and experiences that are not true, we can end up in all kinds of strife, labeling something a thing that is actually not a thing at all. So if somebody is struggling with unreliable erections, again, we come back to the idea of what do they think it's about, what's going on for them. Often, from a clinical medical perspective, unreliable erections, if there is not a medical cause, like if someone has had cancer and they've had a prostatectomy, that's an obvious cause. So there's a link there. Yes, okay, that's that. But for no known cause, so they've had medical tests, they've had, various blood tests, and they've been to see a urologist, and the urologist is like, meh, I don't know what it is. It's highly likely that it's going to be connected to anxiety. And anxiety is a completely normal response to a culture that is deeply uncomfortable with sex and vulnerability. So our work then is about creating a container for that person, that penis haver, to have an experience of pleasure that allows them to encompass the robustness of their experience. And, you know, again, for penis havers, particularly penis havers who identify as cis men, they're not allowed to be vulnerable during sex. They're supposed to be hard and you know, DTF all the time. But a lot of them are not. A lot of them think that that's how they, you know, they've been conditioned to think that way. And the people that they're doing it with also have been conditioned to think that way. And that is a real, that's a real problem for a lot of penis havers, because of this sense of I have to perform, as opposed to I'm allowed to feel. Because when we can reduce the anxiety by allowing feelings to be present, magically the erections tend to come back.
Awesome. I think we're getting close. We're at the end of questions that are related to the content for today. And I've shared in the chat box, for those who have some personal questions, the Embody Labs therapy directory. I've shared that link in the chat so people can grab that if they want to find someone who's trained in this area. And I've also shared your website, Cindy. So I really want to thank you.
Just want to appreciate and say thank you to everybody who showed up today. It's been an absolute honor to be guiding this session for all of you. And I hope to see you at the coaching certificate. I will be teaching many of the modules. I'm one of the co-directors of the program. And for those of you who would like specific help, either for yourself personally or case support, clinical case support, head to my website and learn how to work with me there.
Thank you so very, very much.